working as a lecturer at the Center for Heritage Studies, Tripurandura, Kerala from 2003 to 2007. Since 2007, he has been working as a faculty member at the Department of Epigraphy, Tamil University, Thanjavur. He has published a book titled Tamil Cultural Connections in the year 2000 and has edited many other books. He has published several research seminar papers and has delivered lectures at various regional, national and international academic platforms and events. I invite Dr. Selvakumar to deliver his speech on A Peep into the Grammar of Harappan Art from a Cognitive Archaeological Angle.
Good afternoon to you all. I am indeed very happy to be here in front of you. I would like to thank the CPRIIR Foundation, Dr. Nandita Krishna and Dr. Balaji and other members of this institution for inviting me for this seminar on Harappan art. The title of my presentation is A Peep into the Grammar of Harappan Art from Cognitive Archaeological Angle. Initially, I gave this title. Then as I started working on the paper, I realized it's basically a subjective exercise. This presentation has been divided into three parts. The first part is introductory. The second part presents data sets and also some observation, and finally discussion. So the introduction part deals with art definition and previous research, briefly, cognitive archaeology, concept of grammar. What is art? Art is, always difficult to define. It may elude a precise definition. Normally, we assume that art is not something ordinary. It should have aesthetic appeal. It requires high level of skills. Basically, it is the ability to represent three-dimensional reality into two-dimensional surface, and this kind of cognitive skill is considered very important for the prehistoric humans. Mainly, as Homo sapiens evolved, they acquired these skills through observing the nature, like watching the shadow of animals on the caves. They try to represent them on various rock shelters or other media. And also it involves the ability to convert three-dimensional world into three-dimensional model, what we call as terracotta or plastic art. So the ability to reproduce something in a realistic manner forms part of art, although the modern art would see it other way. So the kind of art has different meaning in different contexts. When we are dealing with the prehistoric communities, even the hand axe is a beautiful work of art. Similarly, the triangle polished stone axes, they are also work of art. As we deal with the prehistoric period, we need to have a different kinds of conception. Art also involves the ability to abstract, to make something abstract and reduce it in a form very suitable for certain media. It also involves creativity and innovation in style. Art is also intimately linked with functionality sometimes. It is sometimes a combination. Sometimes an object which is functional becomes an art when it is used in a different context. For example, there are several pendants found in early historic sites. In this context, we can say an axe, for example, at the site of Pattanam, it has been used as a pendant. So this movement from material culture and materiality into art is a possibility. And also art can be defined as something related to humanness. As I already said, hand axe, cells are also art forms in the prehistoric period. They are also functional categories, tools. As I said, art is period and culture specific. In prehistoric context, it may have different meaning. In a modern and postmodern world, it may have different meaning, but there is some kind of universality in the art. For example, if you look at the rock paintings of Lascaux or other sites, it really stuns you. Whether it is produced in the contemporary period, we have several forms of art often reported as rock art or prehistoric or generally paintings done by communities within the past 100 or 200 years. They are also forms of art. So we see certain amount of universality. And again, the concept of emic and eticness. So something what we call as art, it is our own construction. That's what we call etic construction. How the subjects view a particular image. For example, an image of Nadaraja may be a deity or a god for the subject, but for an outsider, it may be a work of art. So, the same object can be looked at in two different angles. Artistic perception is also always subjective to some extent. So, this paper, I treat this as a subjective exercise because objectivity is something highly problematic. Emic and etic perception I already mentioned, and also naturalistic, realistic, cognitive and symbolic elements are always seen in the material culture and visual cultural productions. These are there in the artifacts that we see. Materiality and material oriented perspectives, that is what archaeologists deal with, and intangibility is lost. When we say the dancing girl, we also indirectly talk about the intangible art. There can be controversy how to interpret, as already Professor Danino discussed, the dancing girl and priest kings, how our interpretations have lot of problem. So this is an issue, correlating the materiality with the intangible components. That is why we are not able to decipher the Harappan script. As I said, art has two components, tangible and intangible components, and we are able to visualize only the tangible components, which can be divided into architecture, geometry, paintings, sculptures, terracotta, and also it involves use of symbols and also material culture. We can also perceive material culture in ornaments and jewelry, decorative motifs, and craft tradition. Craft, we have something called craft as separate, but craft also involves artistic elements. Similarly, literature, poem and musics, which are not traceable from material record. So, this particular slide presents the INDUS chronology from the early period. I think the image has become too small. Can we adjust this? I think it has to be. No, yeah, I think there was an option where we can. Okay, I think this slide size, widescreen is better.
No, but you need to increase zoom also.
Okay, okay. Oh, right. 100%. Okay, then it may become, right. Okay, okay, right. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, here, but again in the presentation mode, it becomes too small, right? Or this?
Wait.
Yeah. Okay. Why this happens, I don't know. Okay, this is the chronology. I think we need not go into that as it is already known. Okay. Yeah. Already it has been discussed. I will move on to the next aspect. One second. Sorry. I don't know why.
Go to this presentation.
Okay. Yeah, because it is too small. I'm sorry for that. Something, I don't know why it so happened. Okay, I will explain. Okay. Yeah, coming to this previous research, several researchers like Marshall, Purcell, Kenoyer, D.K. Chakrabarti, S.R. Rao, Bibilal, and others have worked on the Harappan art aspects, and I have utilized the data from D.K. Chakrabarti's 2014 paper, and also there is an interesting paper by Denis Frenes and Vidale discussing about the Chimera, how Harappan art is, it combines different animals. That is an important paper in which they talk about this as a hypertext. I think these images are too small. I am sorry for this. Denis Frenes and Vidale, they talk about the enigmatic animal, the so-called unicorn. If you look at very closely, you can see some heart-like kind of motif. That's what they call it, is decorating this unicorn animal. If you look at the numerical elements, you can see in the script you have 12 depicted as multiples of 4. Very interestingly, we get 4 based number sequence in some of these Harappan seals. That is something interesting, and also we get 4 into 2 to how they are decorating this particular seals, and we can see certain numerical significance. How many strokes they are decorating, how many lines they are doing it on this particular animal decoration or ceramic vessel painting. That can be also studied. When we try to analyze these seals or other images as a kind of text, we try to look at minutely how exactly they are decorating these elements. So we can see all these patterns here, and there is another important seal in which we have 3-headed animal. It is considered as probably a mythical creation. This is what Denis Frenes and Vidale call as chimera, somewhere where different animals are brought in and combined. A new category has been created, and also I am directly using his own views as part of previous research. In this, they see multiple animals, human, snake, and elephant. All these are combined to form a composite animal. So, at one level, we have a realistic description, narration of an animal. At another level, they are conceiving something. This is where we have problem. We are not able to interpret what exactly this is. They have cited several such examples of Harappan chimera, in which they talk about several seals where there is a combination of different animals into composite figures. Even we have these kind of images, which already Michel Danino discussed about this yogic like figure, and also animal human combined figure, and also something like a god like deity like figure around a kind of canopy or some kind of arch like decoration. We do not know what exactly they are. In the morning, there was also a discussion about a panel, a kind of depiction resembling Mahishasura Mardini, which has been interpreted as, and also sometimes people interpret Sabda Matrikas. But in fact, we need to be very careful because we are dealing with a completely different cultural context. Sometimes the image may look similar. When we are talking about continuity, I think it's much more complicated. As far as the material culture and visual representation, it is easy to interpret. Sometimes it is tempting for us to link those things, but these meanings could be different, and we need to be much more careful. Coming to this inscription, this interpretation of these text as well as the images, there are several theories. Especially Marshall has noted the fusion of several animals. Like we have lot of deities which are combination of one or two aspects here in modern day usage, but in the ancient time we do not know how they have combined, what was the context behind. And Ashko Porpolo has talked about Proto Shiva, and also scholars have suggested animals as totemic symbols of clans. This is one probable explanation also given by Mark Kenoyer. And these chimeras could be part of bureaucratic administrative system. That is what Frennes and Vidale they argue. They say that they could have been used for some kind of administrative complex identity, expressing the identity. So they try to express these identities through the symbols and images. Now I will come to the approach to the Harappan art, how we can look at it. There is something called cognitive archaeology. As part of processual school, as a response to processual school, Colin Renfrew and other scholars, they try to look into the cognitive or thoughts of the ancient people. And there is also one processual school which follows a different line, which does not accept with the processual school. The post-processual school has a different approach which argues all knowledge is subjective. So I am also taking that position. We live almost 5,000 years away, and whatever we conceive, whatever we present about the art of the Harappan people could be subjective. It is again influenced by our own notions. So when we come to this Harappan art, we can visualize the basic components which have been used as addition and multiplication. For example, the particular design component that has been repeatedly used, and they derive these components as design deriving from nature or culture. Sometimes they abstract and reduce these forms. That is how you see them in the decoration. Then we are also finding the use of symbols for which they give different meaning, and it is the meaning that we have problem. It is in interpretation of the meaning we are in trouble. We are not able to interpret. And as I already said, they create basic components which has been repeated. And also we find evidence of numerals and geometry. Coming to the meaning, there are two ways we can look at it. One is looking at the contemporary traditions of that period. Second is using the later tradition, which has in the morning Dr. Michel Danino presented about this continuity. So that is also one approach, trying to look at the Harappan art through later continuity or later similarity in the later day objects or material culture. But I have not attempted these two. I am trying to look at these elements from my own perspective, from my own subjective understanding, by looking at these forms as part of cognitive archaeological angle. Cognitive archaeology, it is about the study of ancient mind and thoughts, how they were representing, how they were thinking. The best example is Colin Renfrew's studies of Harappan weight, where based on the study he could say the Harappans were using 1:2:4, 8, 16, 32. So when we look at material culture, check their weight or through measurement, as Michel Danino did in the case of Dholavira metrology, we can try to understand the underlying thought, how they were using. And Balasubramaniam and Joshi, based on the study of the Harappan scale, they argued that the angulam, or the traditional unit of measurement which Harappans use, was 1.76 centimeter. Similarly, Dr. Michel Danino also arrived at same conclusion. So these kinds of studies fall under cognitive archaeology. Cognitive archaeology involves inferences drawing upon background theory, linking objects from archaeological record to cognitive, which means including psychological, symbolic and ideological features. So we have certain similarity among us. We are all Homo sapiens. We can sometimes deduce or interpret an ancient object. So, using that kind of angle, we can try to study, and we should also see the study of the past is a dialogue between past and present. We cannot escape from this reality. So, traces of cognition can be seen in many objects. One is we should also try to understand the cognitive map of the humans, how it extended over the period of time, which can be studied through paintings, engravings, and use of symbols. In addition, speech, poems, stories, and narratives, they can also reflect this these cognitive elements, but we don't have any access to them in tangible material record, but indirectly we can deduce, like the way we talk about narrative stories seen on some of the Harappan seals. And intangible elements were a reality, belief system was definitely a reality, but unfortunately we are not able to access those things. And the next concept is about material culture, time and space, which this is also important. Then comes the observation of nature, plant and animals, how these people have observed the nature and plants and how they have depicted their mood. Sometimes when you look at some of these terracotta art, really you see the moods and expression depicted. So, which is also an important factor in understanding this cognitive aspect of the past society. Now, I will come to the concept of grammar. What is grammar? Grammar is basically the set of rules that we use to arrange the words and to create sentences according to set rules. For example, in grammar, we have rules for singular and plural and gender, etc. And we can use this concept to understand how Harappans have constructed their visual representation, which we call as art. They could have done it for different purposes and their meaning could be different. We seek to study how art forms have been created and used according to a grammar. My study is just an attempt to enter into the grammar of the Harappan art. So, for which I have used now I am coming to the second part, the data set. I have used the already available publication from Chakrabarti, Kenoyer and from B.N. Prabhakar and ASI publication. And mostly in the context of Harappans, we get paintings and clay figurines. So, coming to this tradition, the Indus tradition, we have evidence starting from the early Mehergar period. In the Neolithic context itself, we get a lot of paintings. If you look at closely, you can see how they have used these U-shaped design in twins and in multiple hanging sequence. And also in here, you can see a row of animals above certain horizontal bands, and also you can see a fish there and also other birds here. So, in the early time, they are using more natural elements, animals, as part of their paintings. Here, interestingly, they had a very keen observation. What we see in these paintings is that they very closely observed the nature and they have tried to reproduce that. Here, you can see a terracotta figurine from, this is also from Mehergar. And here you can see that a bull has been very realistically, but it has been reduced. It has been reduced, abstracted, and they were not trying to reproduce the features exactly here. So, in the later day seal figurines, you can see that they have tried to depict realistically. So, you can see animals in naturalistic designs and also inverted arch, rows of animals and plants as part of the decoration scheme. So, what we are trying to do as part of cognitive archaeology is how these paintings are constructed by using small components, what kind of schemes they adopt how they decorate. Here, for example, in the body of this particular bull, you can see 8 lines. In some places I have seen that they have used four kind of strokes. This can be interpreted in two manner. One, we can see that these people had a kind of specificity on the number. Sometime if somebody gives us something, we say that give me 10 rupees or 100 rupees. We have some kind of specialness for certain round number. So here in 2 or 3 contexts I noticed that they were using some 8 based number sequence. There is also a problem with this. Sometimes the decoration, we need to get into the mind of the artist. The artist, how they decorate. Sometimes they try to fill in the gap. Sometimes we could be over reading the fact. This is one of the problem when we are trying to do. So this I already wanted to highlight, because sometimes we see some certain pattern. So only we need to, only if we can meet the artist, we will be able to. That is why I said it is a kind of subjective exercise. And also we find in the early Neolithic art form, in the early Harappan stages, animals depicted sometime as outline, sometime with fill, sometime with cross strokes. This one is from Nausharo, and also we get painted pottery. Here you get zigzag lines in two zigzag lines between 2 and 3 horizontal lines. So we get a lot of such schemes in painting, and also this famous horned deity from Amri. This is also something very interesting. Very interestingly, the Harappans have a kind of likeness for nature, what we follow in literature as eco-criticism or eco-critical approach. If you look at all the early cultures, they had a kind of close relationship with the nature. They tried to depict all the animals or the plants that they used. Here, they had a kind of penchant for the horns of the animals, and the horns are very much exaggerated. Normally humans sometime in the if you want to look at the later day continuity in language, we will say, sometime we used to ask people, do you have horns? So this kind of expression is there. So possessing horn, if you look at even this Mahishas and also some of the tribal leaders, and they try to have these kind of horn like headdress. So this is something we can draw parallel, but we can't jump into a conclusion. As I said, these kind of elements are very much present there. Then we also get a lot of complex designs. This is where the geometric concepts are involved. Again, these geometric concepts may not tell much. Sometimes it can just occurs to humans, like the way we see hand axes all across the world, they are similar. Circles all across the world similar. But what I try to look at is here is how these painters were reproducing these images. Sometimes they play with a different combination. You get wavy lines, sometimes diamond shapes, sometimes triple concentric wavy figures. So we can really minutely look at. And also here in this particular case, this one is from Dam Sadat, early Harappan paintings, early Harappan or early Indus tradition paintings, where we can see repeated 3 strokes. Here we can ask why they only put 3 strokes here. This is something very interesting, and also in some places you get 10 horizontal lines at the bottom, and they depict a bullfight here. This is something which they saw in the nature. Another important aspect is tradition of painting in the rim or the lip, near the lip they paint. So we can observe such minute features of these paintings. What I am trying to do is, as part of this cognitive archaeological approach, we try to look at the images and we try to see if there is any logic or any kind of pattern in their behavior. As I said already, it is a subjective exercise, otherwise we have no other go. And here also in the next image you can see leaf design. In the morning also we had a discussion on this people leaf. which has been very frequently depicted as a decorative motif here. And also we get combination of various design. This is where we get more interesting decoration. This is there in Amri pottery. As I said, we are talking about Harappan tradition. It is not necessary that everything was similar. There were a lot of regional traditions and variation. So these kinds of decoration in the Amri pottery are very interesting. We also get geometric designs like this is from Mundikak, zigzag lines in multiples, slanting line, concentric diamonds. They are frequently occurring here, and again we have more such paintings, rows of animals, triple leaves, and sometime probably I think the triple also has some kind of significance. So from what we can deduce from the repeated occurrences is that certain numbers, certain elements they are repeated certain number of times. This could have had some meaning. That's what I am trying to argue, because we are not entering into their, it's not easy to enter into their cognitive universe. So artists will know that each kind of art tradition has a specific way of depicting images. Sometimes we cannot take art to actually represent the reality. What happens is in art they have lot of limitation. Sometimes they do lot of reduction and abstraction which should not be directly interpreted to link the past. This limitation is there. So we can see certain numerical scheme also very clearly here. I am not going to say why this is something we need to interpret and understand. As I said earlier, sometimes these designs explain the creativity of the potter. Sometimes it may not be a universal of that culture, it could be a kind of work of the potters, but then they start imitating and adopting. That is how a culture is archaeologically defined. And again this could be a product could be created by one group of potters for different communities. It also happens. Producing pottery for a particular community with particular tradition. This is where we need to look into the craft production of the Harappans, how this craft production happened, how they were using the symbol. This actually, what I am doing is I am trying to understand. It is much more complex study wherein we need to look at the data more minutely. And also we get a lot of multiple leaves, birds, peacock and trees, and this particular jar is from Lothal, where we get a lot of square with 4 triangles, in which 2 triangles opposing are shaded, and also we get 4 leaf patterns, birds and trees and foliage, and such kind of vessels could have been meant for certain special ritual occasions. We also get repeated plans and stories. This is where we are coming to the next level. At one level, we have a simple narrative decoration repeatedly occurring animals or repeatedly occurring elements or motifs. At another level, they are trying to convey certain meaning. In some of these images, we see a bird and an animal. It may have related to some kind of stories. Sometimes, these kind of storytelling. So we should also see these paintings, at least some of them. What we see in the seals also some kind of narrative stories. This is where the next level of interpretation, next level of creation comes. At one level, simple image. At second level, storytelling. Similarly, this the so-called buffalo slayer, and also this proto-Siva or whatever that figure, yogic, they all convey certain mythological or ritual stories which were part of their belief, but what we get to see is a kind of art form. This is where I try to see the emic and etic. We see it as a kind of, we try to interpret, associate it with Mahishasura Mardani, but we do not know what they were producing. So at one level, it is the emic understanding which is inaccessible. In the middle level, we see it as a pure form of art, and in the third level, we are trying to interpret as a kind of story associated with various living traditions or existing tradition, but that is very complicated. Now we are coming to the terracotta modeling approach, how they were modeling the terracotta figure, simple modeling, plastic art. Again, this is determined by the cognition of the potters. So normally how we associate culture, sometime it could be an individual tradition or a group tradition which becomes an identity of a particular culture. How these potters produce, then it becomes an identity. This is where we have several other elements, limitation of the raw material and cultural tradition. For example, we have a lot of headdress, and also we can draw parallel to the later period depiction. This is where I argue there is some universality. So as I said earlier, these early images are more naturalistic, simplistic in art form, unique cultural product produced. They are limited to particular cultural context, that we should be very careful. So I also did notice some of the parallels between Harappan terracotta and the Shunga terracotta which are found in Bengal region. But the only thing is we can talk about some similarity, and otherwise to link them it is much more complicated, I believe, because they belong to different cultural contexts. And also we see a lot of abstract images, and they try to simplify the body into multiple geometric part. This can be seen in the Birana, that so-called dancing girl graffiti. You can see double triangle in opposite direction. This is also there in some of the paintings of Iron Age, early historic period on the rocks, and also in the other side. It is simply a kind of reducing body into a geometric part. Here we can see this bull has been reduced into cylindrical. And also we did some work with the Kerala artist, and I'm sorry that the image is so small. And we worked with a potter who has been making terracotta images in contemporary context in Kerala. Very interestingly, it appears that some of the techniques of producing images are same. And also I see there is some kind of timelessness and universality in art production, and that is something very similar. But at the same time, we need to be very clear that they belong to specific cultural context. We also have a lot of female figurines which are interpreted as mother goddess. They were discussed in the morning. I will not go into the detail, but what they tell is, they tell about the way of lives of the people, the way they decorate the ornaments, how the reality has been represented in the art form to some extent. Art form, in a sense, even today, sometimes representation of reality, sometime imagination, sometime exaggeration. So we should see this art as combining all these three characteristics, and these are some of the images. I will not go into the detail. Again, there is one kind of terracotta object which is interpreted as a mask. We do not know if Harappans had some kind of performing arts. I believe that they must have had these kind of things, but we are not able to again get into. Sometime we will never be able to, because that is the nature of archaeology, where not everything is preserved. So we need to deduce and we need to use our logic to understand how these people were doing. Also the purpose of these images, they could have used it for ritual worship, and sometimes as toys for the children, which is also very important, because I have noticed sometimes archaeologists, they try to over-interpret, especially in the context of rock art. We tend to do a lot of field work among the tribal communities who are making rock art. When we interact with them, when we ask them why you are painting, they say, no, we just feel like. There is no ulterior motive or anything. It is just a product of art meant for the kids, or sometimes just they do it. That is how we should also see some of these terracotta images. Sometimes they could be decorative, and also they fulfilled the multiple needs of the societies, and also they were used as games. Yes. So we get objects in various moods. You can really see in some of the terracotta images, the artists have tried to, insert or inbuild some kind of moods or their feelings that could be noticed. That is again, as I said, is very subjective. We also get a lot of toy cards. They, in a sense, they are miniature of real life material objects, but they do convey that they were, sometimes these objects were made for the children, and also displaying natural animal faces, because when I look at the terracotta bull figurines, you see certain diversity. This could be sometime the real variation. This is where I argued that these images, terracotta images and depiction, would be useful for the archaeozoologists to understand the various species, because archaeozoologists, what they do, basically they get the bones, and then they use the logic of universalism or uniformitarianism and compare with contemporary animals. So here this could also help to understand the variation, because sometime I have noticed that some of the animals, when we look, even among us, there are different faces, different individuals. Among animals also, I have noticed, especially the bulls, some of the bulls have very peculiar face structure, and when we look at these kind of images, we can really take that these people were representing the facial variation or physical variation in the among the animals in reality. At the same time, as I said, there is also danger of in reduction, which they adopt, reduction and abstraction. In some of the images, it appears that they were simply trying to adopt. If you look at the kinds of bulls, which are also even in the contemporary period, each bull or each animal has a peculiar facial expression. This is something I think the Harappan artists noticed. They were very familiar with the animals, and they sometimes tried to model the diversity that they saw in the world. This is what I try to argue. In some of the images really could help zooarchaeologists to understand the type of animals, and also sometimes it is probable that these terracotta figurines were used as part of architecture or some other objects, or sometime as part of their goods or commodities. We do not know. So we need not see all of them merely as art. Sometimes they had definite functional role. And also if they are representing some clans, and they could have been created for that purpose. And also animals association, we have an image of monkey depicted. It is interpreted as a monkey, but I do not know what it is. Again, there are problem in interpretation. It is likelihood, it is probable that the people were performing with animals. So we get such kind of people performing. It could be interpreted in that way. You get much more diverse variety of animal representation. They all indicate here, in such cases you get stylish or reduced or abstracted images. They simply exhibit their cognitive understanding of that particular community of potters or modelers who made these images. Also we get possible evidence for pet animals. We can indirectly interpret from the such kind of animals found in archaeological context. And also we get natural representation of natural variation. And also sometimes we can be very sure that these people appreciated the natural beauty, and sometimes they were exaggerating natural features. These things were there. And also eco-criticism and animals in culture. I think as far as Harappans is concerned, I think they were using these animals for several purposes, and they were intimately associated with their life and society. And we have narrative stories, as already mentioned. Sometime clan symbol they could have been used, and also we get a lot of images like bull vaulting. Some of the images sometimes people try to associate it with the bull jallikattu. I don't think so it can be, but it is something, it looks like some kind of bull vaulting or similar kind of tradition where the people who are associated with the animal, they try to depict them in their art, because it is a kind of relationship that people have with the animal, which if you look at any pastoral society you will understand. These depiction definitely suggests their imagination as well as the realistic approach, and probably they were worshipping animals, or sometime they were using them as identity labels. We also have this a lady holding a tiger image and with an elephant. Maybe it narrates a story or a myth or a belief system. That is something important. Dancing. This is something we discussed in the morning, the so-called dancing girl. Was she really dancing, or she is simply standing there? And also we get a bronze bull figurine reported from Kalibangan, and also multiple monkeys together. So these people have very closely observed, and there is another graffiti from Brahana where there is the same image similar to the dancing girl, so-called dancing girl. We don't know whether this is girl or a boy or a lady, we don't know. See here, you can see that how this body has been reduced in an exaggerated triangle. So this technique is very common all across India. We have a lot of stone sculptures which Prabhakar presented, which had which were assembled with body parts, and several scholars have worked on them. Dancing, another image that has been reconstructed by Marshall, the so-called priest king. In the morning Prabhakar showed about this, and the dress decoration, trefoil design, they are all indeed very interesting, and they tell a lot of stories about realism and social aspects, and also the so-called object which we interpret as, some of the people interpret as Shivalinga or Linga, and it's again problematic. We get more such sculptures, the trefoil flower design. Some people have interpreted as a kind of textile tradition in which they were making these kind of design. And that is also something interesting as far as Harappan image is concerned. One thing is, we can notice probably in some of the images these Harappans were using accuracy in depiction. So this is something which I noticed. Probably in this particular case they must have taken a lot of effort to depict this image more accurately. Then coming to this paintings, in paintings also we can reduce, like the way how we use words in a sentence differently, we can also see here how they have used certain component. In this jar, Harappan jar, right at the bottom, you see honeycomb design and then multiple arches. So we can see them as a kind of syntax 1, syntax 2, in which sometimes these arches are placed one above the another. Sometimes they are directly placed above, sometimes they are placed in a overlapping fashion. This is what I try to argue, that syntax 1 placed in adjacent position, syntax 2 one above the other, syntax 3 overlapping. So here this is an exercise in which we are getting into the mind of the potter who made the painting. So what we are trying to get is how these universals of so-called Harappan acted and how they were making these designs, and we are trying to understand if there is any significance across the culture. Similarly, border lines, sometimes we find them into 1, 2, 4 combination. We have a crisscross design in between the horizontal line, quadruple triangles. A square has been divided into 4 triangles. Sometimes the opposite ones are shaded. So we get to know the geometry, how these people are simply making the decoration of the ceramics. So ceramics forms are also a kind of art. These ceramic vessel forms which signify a particular culture. In a broader context, in order to define Neolithic and Chalcolithic or Harappan, sometimes we use ceramic vessel shapes, although we cannot directly consider them as a different kind of art. Definitely I would say, as far as Harappans and other communities could be concerned, they could be seen as a kind of forms of materiality which acted as a symbols. Archaeologists use this to distinguish Chalcolithic and Neolithic, etc. So that we can look at. Next is architecture. We find evidence of geometry, building plan, corbelling. They also indicate their pattern, how they were laying out, how they were laying out the streets. I think this also we cannot directly call it as a kind of art. It is a kind of geometry which is also part of their family, part of their society. This is what I used to tell sometime. Suppose if there is an image, if this particular image is depicted in a photograph is placed here, if it is little tilted, we get confused. So there is a kind of symmetry and order which is essential. If the architecture is very perfect, if the streets are perfect, if the a house should be perfect. So if the house is not proper, it will lead to, people sometimes believe it will lead to a lot of complication. Similarly, we have a house in which we have a photograph. If the photo is not fixed in orientation, it will create a lot of problem for us. This is what I try to argue as a kind of symmetric and orderliness. This is there even in many contexts. Sometimes people cannot stand if particular photograph is placed on the wall, if it is not placed in a perfect orientation, because we will get confused. It will disorder. If it, you can see that if you start rotating yourself in an opposite direction, it can cause a lot of trouble. Probably that is why we have this circumambulatory, coming around the temple in a particular direction. These could, in a sense, convey how these people were looking at the world, how they were designing, because there is a kind of orderliness which we attribute with the urbanization in this period. These are from the site of Dholavira. You also in the brick size, you get 1:2:4 ratio. That also indicate a kind of orderliness in their measurement of the world. And I have taken this photograph from Prabhakar. I have acknowledged, but unfortunately I don't know what happened when I shifted to this computer. The image has completely changed. I had put acknowledgement messages also here. Some of the Harappan burials and their shape, they also indicate their approach to the construction, landscape modeling, landscape orientation and creation, funerary system. That also indicates some kind of symbolism. Harappan script is also another big area. I will not go into the detail. We have a lot of Harappan symbols. The seals and their purpose, scholars have already debated. What is interesting here is, and the reduction and abstraction of the images, in which they have produced diverse varieties and they have attributed lot of meanings to them. That is where the symbolism coming in. You find a lot of those images, sometimes the objects. This is where I said material culture becomes a symbol that has been reduced, and they had given a meaning or a phonetic value about which we do not know. Already I mentioned some of these things. The morning Michel Danino showed this particular image. We have this kind of never-ending loop occurring in Indus tradition and also at Fatehpur Sikri. And I have noticed several other elements in the later cultural period. For example, certain board games that are found at Lothal, we have parallel in some of the South Indian temples. They have been drawn. So definitely there is a continuity of tradition, but we cannot say more than that. And also Harappan scales, we have evidence for continuity of measurement, and also Harappan weights already I said, and we also did some research on the medieval weight system, and we found sometime the Harappan weight paralleling the multiples of Gunja seed or Kundrimani, Abras Precatarius, and so there is some kind of similarity. Sometimes it is just coincidence. This is where we need to look at the, sometimes things are universal. People across the world think alike. Sometimes people living here, people living there, they use the same logic. So we cannot easily link that. These board games already suggested. I think these board game tradition should also be seen as part of the art. We get lot of material culture. I will not go into the detail because we don't have much time. I will go into the discussion part. Now understanding the grammar of Harappan art. What is the grammar? How these things were organized. Can we see some pattern in this? So I have divided these images into several categories. First category as naturalism, depiction of animals and plants in exact appearance. We get a lot of natural motifs like crocodile, fish, and they have taken a lot of effort to reflect the actual physical features of the animal, which definitely indicates their skill and cognitive capability and their fine observation. Second category as artistic representation, it includes human-made material culture. We call so-called jar symbol, actually jar, and later on that form itself has been reduced. Probably they gave a phonetic value, we do not know, and also they were doing a lot of variation and differentiation. This is something important. The way they have distinguished different animals, different symbols. Sometimes in artistic tradition they exaggerate the features in order to make the differentiation. Sometimes it is not realistic, sometimes they do exaggeration. And also, as I said, painting, sometimes we see 8 strokes, sometimes 4, and we also get plants repeatedly occurring, people leaf, and animals, and then imaginary concepts. That's what we call ritual or mythological, what Denis Furness and Vidal call as chimera, and that comes into another category. We get multiple arches, overlapping arches, honeycomb designs, horizontal lines, and then 3-dimensional representation. Third category, the plastic figures, stone sculptures and all that, they come into that category. Fourth category is the narrative themes, where they try to tell a concept. It is not simple, one animal or one-to-one. Here it is slightly more advanced. They are trying to convey certain mythology in a kind of theme to communicate. The purpose of all this is to communicate. The Harappans were communicating to the fellow beings through these images, and sometimes they convey these images as narratives, and also we get several such stories. It's something like storytelling. Storytelling is also a form of text, a pictorial text we should call, and the script shows very high level of abstraction. This we discussed in the morning. This is from harappa.com. This figure also we discussed. So they are trying to convey some concept. It is not single, it is a collective thing, but we are not able to read the script, and these kind of images are also very common. Then we have fifth category as geometric and non-geometric designs, where the potters are trying to create various designs and their combinations, and there could be some kind of scheme or numerology behind them, and also they could be symbolic, or it could be simply cognitive. Sometimes we produce design just like that. It is just part of human cognition, we could say. They are that's what I said, or they are just certain forms, just that, nothing beyond, nothing to interpret. And also sixth category, this is where I said the symbols, where they try to add additions subtractions and shorter components. We can also see definitely pictogram, ideograms, phonogram and syllabic. It is again problematic, and there are theories, and also we get knowledge of their numerals and knowledge of fractions and geometric forms with the symbolic value. We also get, as I already said, material cultural form. See, we get a lot of ornaments with these kind of shapes. Probably they had a textile and also music, sometime whistle like terracotta object, and also shank, they indicate music. So some of these material culture indirectly tell us that they also had certain intangible forms of art. We get these lot of such images, like circles, half circles appearing. They are simply forms of analysis. Sometimes they may not tell. So sometimes this description of this material culture as part of cognitive archaeology simply a statement of description which may not tell us much, but it is still a kind of description of their cognitive understanding of different forms. Then you also get a realistic depiction. You are sometime, I think they also had a mind for precision. So you see variation in the faces of individual, though we had limited images, definitely they were bringing out, and it could have some kind of significance we are not able to understand. So as I summarized across my research presentation, naturalism is one form. Then we have imaginary concepts and design in their art, symbolism, narrative story, and we see high degree of abstraction in some contexts, and also they used material culture and design to express socio-political and regional variation and identities. Then you find concepts such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, symmetry, opposing designs, these parameters determining these forms could be raw material, cognition and belief system, which we call it as ritual. That is where we have a lacuna we are not able to understand. We also find orderliness, symmetry and proportion, scheme and execution in a perfect manner. So art and symbols for a complex society with diverse communities. So they were using these kind of material cultural production and visual representation for a complex society with multiple communities. And there have been attempts towards universality and standardization. Sometimes we see it through scripts and symbols in some contexts. So we get pluralistic meanings, and they were not universal. So there you see two things. One is specificity, another is universal standardization attempt across the Indus Valley, Indus plains, and then we do see continuity of certain traditions. Sometimes this could be mere coincidence. When we say Magisha Mardani are here, it could be a sheer coincidence. Sometimes people anywhere in India could use these gunja seeds as for measurements. Same way people can use their body parts for measurement. It could be simply a tradition. The reality could be much more complicated. So we need to be very careful in the interpretation of these aspects. So I would like to thank once again the CPRIIR Foundation and also D.K. Chakrabarty for some of the images, R.S. Bist and V.N. Prabhakar. Thank you once again. I think I am on time, so I think I took more time. Sorry for that. Yeah, there was some problem with because when they looked on my computer, they looked big. Maybe when I changed, okay, so the images became too small.
Can I?
Yes.
Can I? Yeah. I mean, while discussing the linga, so-called linga, actually there are various representations. It's not only in an independent form as a freestanding linga they have shown, but it is also in that so-called yogic posture, the so-called Pashupati seal. There's a clear delineation of the phallus. in that.
Yes, yes, that is there.
And even the stone image from Dolavira, which is very closer to the so-called priest king, it also has a depiction of phallus. So somehow there is a clear association of these kind of symbols in the Harappan culture, and the freestanding that linga, it's a clear indication of some sort of a religious identity. From Harappa, you have a lot of omphalos. I mean,
Yeah,
polished, like, I mean, it's a kind of a representation of the linga in an iconic form, and a plain, as though it's represented a phallus. So I think there are various representations which clearly point towards a clear cult activity going on. I mean, we cannot shrug it off. Actually, I mean,
yeah, but so what I am trying to say, there could be multiplicity of worship, right? Maybe some groups could have followed linga worship. Is
but
it
the
probable?
But the core is that the phallic worship. The core is that. I mean, the belief system is.
So maybe they could have promoted. Sometimes the cults are also promoted as part of integration. So when this integration era happens, that we need to see what really they are trying to, integrate. What kind of symbols
that was there. That was there. Particularly the horn headgear and the people leaf. I mean, it appears well into the regional Chalcolithic cultures. If you see the Mundigak, even it is widespread. Share Shokte, Mundigak, even Mehergarh Chalcolithic face, you all have this kind of people leaf motif. And the horn headgear, it appears in the Sindh, lower Sindh, and even in Punjab. I mean, at Karanpura also we have this horn headgear. So it's again a widespread kind of a cult identity, and that's how it could have integrated.
Yeah, but again, sometimes we see uniformity in the case of southern Indian megaliths also. We try to see, but there could be other variation in meaning also. That is probable. What I am trying to say, can we say entire Harappan region they had only one form of religious or ideological thing, or there could be plural? That's what I am trying to. Yeah, there could be plural kind of, one dominant kind of worship, maybe we can see that.
Some of us
Oh.
have to catch.
Oh. Actually, so
yeah.
what was the food habits and vegetable culture and fruit culture? Why there was no weapon culture, and why there was no bow and arrow?
No, they had weapons definitely. I think a lot of okay. So yeah, we can discuss later. Thank you.